Hello, writers, and welcome back to Spooky Writes, your channel all about writing. I'm your host, who is secretly a ghost, Kamal Onor. Now, if you like this channel and you want to stay up to date with all things spooky and all things writing, make sure to hit subscribe. And also give this video a good thumbs up, help spread the channel, it means a lot. Now, have you ever received the writing advice of show, don't tell? Because this is one of the most common pieces of advice that is given out to beginning writers and to people pursuing writing. It's the age-old advice of show, don't tell. Well, today I'm going to be talking all about this piece of advice and why it's given out so frequently. So, let's head into the storm.
It's the raven's call, the werewolf's howl, the vampire's bite. You search through the woods for safety, but all you find is... Okay, rights.
So show, don't tell tends to be a pretty common piece of advice that people will often throw out there as kind of a catch-all be-all for if you want to make your writing better, just show and don't tell. Now, what does this actually break down into? What it's actually meaning is don't treat your audience like they're stupid, because you shouldn't, because as the writer, as the author, you shouldn't be treating your audience like they're unintelligent. You should be able to highlight things and lead them to conclusions. And this is something that we see all the time that's done in visual media, such as film or television shows. You might see someone glance at the knife before they reach for it, or you might see someone do something in a visual form that hints to the audience of what's going to happen next, or hints how that character is feeling. Because in film and televised media, we don't have a lot of inner monologues unless every little piece is narrated with voiceover. I walked into the room. I looked for a knife. I saw one on the table and I reached for it. Right? This would be ineffective in a visual media. This is why we don't have constant voiceover and constant narration in most film. But we do have this available to us in written form. We have perspectives that give us the deep insight of our characters, that give deep insight into how our characters are feeling and to how they are and to what they're picking up on within the scene, within the novel, within the short story. And this often leads a lot of writers to over-explain what's going on in the scene. And this can be dreadful in your writing. It can sort of club the reader over the head with, this is what the person is feeling, when instead of saying Sally was sad because someone just broke up with her, let me rephrase. I'll use a better example. I was sad because Sheila left me. Remember Sheila? I do. I still hope she remembers me. Crying baby. And so oftentimes, if you are spelling out every single action, every single detail of how a character is feeling, it leaves no room for interpretation. And as a reader, we want to be able to interpret things. We want to be able to pick up on the subtleties in the scene. We don't necessarily need to be told that a character is angry, especially if that character is behaving in a way that is obviously them being angry. He shouted or he yelled. He or she picked up a hairdryer and threw it across the room, hurling it at someone's head, but he ducked out of the way in the last minute. Because I am too quick. It goes right over my head. So show, don't tell tends to be a very easy way of telling people to not dumb it down for your readers and to trust your readers. It encapsulates this idea of readers don't need to have everything spelled out. You need to trust that your readers are able to pick up on the subtleties. And that's one of the beautiful things about writing, is the fact that everyone can read the same book and get something else out of it. People can interpret things and ideas differently when they read a book, and this is where a dialogue is able to be sparked, where a dialogue is able to occur. And once people are able to talk, they can say, I got this out of this scene. I thought the character felt this way. So instead of spelling every minute detail out, you want to leave it somewhat ambiguous by showing how your character is behaving in a specific way that is going to suggest to the reader how a character might feel. Now, I don't believe that this rule needs to apply to every single piece of writing. I think there are certainly times when it's perfectly fine to tell how a character is feeling versus showing, and there does need to be a balance. You shouldn't rely on any writing rule 100% of the time. So a little bit of an interpretation of that rule is show don't tell can be applicable if you are overemphasizing your scenes, if you're spelling every minute detail. He was angry as he gripped the door, crying for Sheila to come back. He fell to the floor, exhausted from weeping on hours on hours. This is all stuff that you could easily do, and show don't tell is going to, if you rely on show don't tell, it's going to force you to have much more concise language. And when you have concise language, when you have terse language, when you have well-defined, unelaborated sentences, you can really sort of cut to the bone of what your characters are feeling, and your readers will appreciate it. Because if you, instead of saying, I was sad as I walked through the rain, I was feeling empty and devoid of meaning and purpose, you could instead show a character just somberly walking through the rain, looking and feeling dejected. And so when you're instead of, but again, this is something that you shouldn't rely on 100% of the time. There are certainly times when you do need to show instead of telling. Or rather, there are certainly times when you do need to tell how a character is feeling as opposed to simply showing. And this also might be due to how the proximity that you are to the narrator. If you're telling a story in first person, of course you're going to be very close to that narrator character. It's going to be, I felt this, I did this. And you can also, instead of saying I felt this, and you should, and if you're finding it's difficult to show instead of telling, try and write a scene, try and edit one of your scenes, and if you're overusing the word feel or felt, try removing feel or felt, and instead, as a fun activity, instead replace feel and felt, just remove that from the scene entirely, and instead describe how that character is feeling, as opposed to simply stating he was sad. You can talk about him crying on the floor. You can talk about him eating pints of Ben & Jerry's or eating a whole cheesecake. I've been there. I don't recommend it. But those are my thoughts on the writing advice of show, don't tell. I think it's something that a lot of teachers and a lot of educators tend to throw around a lot more than they probably should. Because again, you should never rely on any writing rule 100% of the time. Everything in writing has exceptions. There are rules and there are guidelines that you can follow to a certain degree, but at some point you need to take the bumpers off. You need to just full send. You need to, instead of playing safely, you need to just write. So if you write and you write and you write, and then really in editing, if you're noticing that you're using the word feel or felt, or you're over explaining characters' emotions, instead replace feel or felt with describing the way that a character clenches his fist. Instead of saying he or she was angry, show him or her reacting and behaving in a way that the reader is obviously going to pick up on the fact that this character is angry. And that way you can avoid ever using the word feel or felt, because feel and felt tend to be often a cheaper way of describing a scene. And when you're describing how a character is feeling, if you avoid using feel and felt and instead you use strong vocabulary, you use strong verbs, you use words that allow for a lot more emotion and a lot more interpretation, this is going to slow your scene down. It's going to force you to take a moment to pause and to really hone in on the minute details of how a character is reacting to what has occurred to him or her. And so that's what I have for you this week, that's what I have for you on this episode of Spooky Rights. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, subscribe and keep it spooky. And of course, here's your writing prompt for sticking all the way through the video. Rebecca bent down to pick up the seashell before turning with a look of blank. So set your timer and start writing. Thank you so much.